Hello. Today we come together to celebrate place. Literally, we consider streets and spaces in Washington, DC and Baltimore. And metaphorically, we explore imagined places, spiritual spaces, composite communities, and interiorities. Place takes many shapes. This is BMA NMWA, Pride of Place.
Hi, everybody. Today we welcome Renee Stout and Shan, Wallace. They make their homes and work in Washington, DC and Baltimore, respectively. They have been inspired by and collaborated with members of their communities. They have researched and embraced local and collective histories, enriching the visual culture of the places many of us call home. Hi, I'm Addie Gayoso, and I'm from the National Museum of Women in the Arts in Washington, DC.
And I'm Veronica Bedencourt from the Baltimore Museum of Art in Baltimore, Maryland. And as always, we are extremely live.
That's right. It's great to be here with everyone today. This is our final episode of BMA NMWA, and it's been a pleasure to come to you every month. Our first guest today, Renee Stout, grew up in Pittsburgh and received her BFA from Carnegie Mellon University in 1980. She moved to Washington, DC in 1985 when she began to explore the spiritual roots of her African American heritage through her work, and eventually became the first American to exhibit at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African Art. Renee is inspired by the African diaspora, as well as everyday life in DC neighborhoods and current events. She employs a variety of media, which we'll talk about today, and she's really interested in creating work that encourages us to sort of examine self, to be introspective, and also to laugh a little bit at the absurdities of life. Renee, thank you so much for joining us today. I also like to mention that Renee's work is actually included in both NMWA's and the Baltimore Museum of Art collections, and we're going to talk a little bit about both today. Hi, Renee. How are you?
Fine. How are you? Thank you.
Good. So good to see you today.
Same here.
Yeah. And it's lovely to get to talk and to know that your work is in both of our collections. I would love to start with a suite of photographs that we have at the BMA called Red Room at 5. And here we go. Andrea's doing the screen, the streaming magic. So Renee, can you help us kind of talk us through where we are? Because this looks so fantastical and otherworldly, but maybe you can tell us a little bit more about kind of how this photograph came to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, this photograph is like you're saying, a suite of photographs. There are 6 of them, and it's called Red Room at 5 because 5 is the number of love, and Urzili is the Haitian goddess of love, beauty, and wealth. And shortly after moving to Washington, DC in 1985, I discovered the Museum of African Art, and when I started going there, I realized that some of the African art that I saw at the Carnegie Museum, it's like it wasn't in context in the way that they could put it in context at the National Museum of American Art. African art. Yeah. And I started to really make these connections between the spiritual belief systems of the entire African diaspora. So even in Haiti, there are these like roots and seeds of African art in there. And so Urzili was one of the deities that I was fascinated with because, of course, she's a feminine deity. And, what woman wouldn't, like a deity that's, embodies love, beauty, and wealth. So I started doing a series, and I continue to do works in homage to Urzili, who is a very temperamental deity. And she's never satisfied. So she's always crying, and, you can never give her enough. So her followers have altars that, bring her offerings of perfume and, money and candies and champagne and beautiful things. And so this particular piece was done. I have a friend who's an art curator, and she has a home in Richmond. And I visited her home for a party one day. And she said, "How would you like to see that red room? I have a red room back here." And so I went in, and I just almost fell out because it was an installation in itself. And she hadn't even realized that, this woman had the strangest taste. She was kind of stuck in the 70s. So the room kind of looked like the 1970s, but it was a perfect Urzili altar. I mean, it's just like there's nothing that I could have added to it. So I came back like a week later with my camera and did a series of photographs in the room. And so what you see is literally what was in the room.
Yeah, and you added nothing.
Added nothing, just played with the lighting. That's all they're going to do.
Which is, it's kind of amazing, because I'm wondering how that, the Richmond art historian was thinking about this room. Like, is this just her bedroom?
It was just her bedroom. She didn't think in terms of Ursula, that wasn't her thinking at all. It's just, like I said, she had sort of a 70s kind of kitschy taste, and her bed was round. This was a round bed. She had these pillows with, these cherubs like strapped around them with this golden rope, and of course, in some European history and culture, cherubs represent love and that kind of thing. So of course, it all fit in. So I thought it was like just perfect. Even the lamps had cherubs on them.
Even the lamps, that's amazing. Well, and I think it's beautiful, because it really kind of speaks to the way that your kind of art historical and cultural framework really sort of made this installation into something that was maybe legible in a different way. In that for her, it was just her room, but for you, it was kind of a ready-made installation, a ready-made shrine to Ursula.
Yeah, it was a setting. And it's, now that I think about it, before I had never placed myself within the work, but I felt like I needed to illustrate the idea of Ursula waiting on a lover to come. Standing in her bedroom, and she's getting ready for this, what she feels is this, sensual experience. So that's why she's standing by the window, because she keeps checking to see if it's coming. And so you see her in various stages of dress, like she's getting ready. And, but, at the end, it's a frame that's empty because it's left open. You never know if he arrives or not. Like, they could be on the bed and you just can't see them, or he didn't come at all. And so the reason why I did it like that is because, supposedly she's always disappointed with everything and everybody.
I really love, Renee, that you've sort of inserted yourself into this narrative, and that in a way, this space was this like ready-made installation. It was a work of art to you. And I'd love to sort of think a little bit more about how you place yourself in some of your works, and also thinking about how you've sort of created windows into your psyche, and even sort of your alter egos that you talk about. And I wanted to sort of transition now to a work in our collection called 7 Windows. And I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about the space in which you created it, and sort of how it inspired this particular series of works.
When I did this piece, 7 Windows, I had a studio on O Street in Northwest DC. That's actually only a few blocks from where I live now. And it's one of the few studio buildings in the city, because DC was never that kind of industrial city where there's a lot of factory buildings that you can turn into loft spaces. But I did have a really nice, spacious loft. And it just happened to be one of the ones on the front on the second floor that had 7 windows going across, 7 huge windows. And so this was around the time that I was developing a second alter ego, the Fatima Mayfield alter ego at that time. And part of the thing that I like to do for viewers is to make the viewer feel like they're a voyeur looking in on something. I like to tell a story. And, at the time that I did this piece, I was dating a poet and hanging around with poets, slam poets, all kinds of poets. And they used to workshop in my studio, and just listening to them talk about words and the power of words. And I've always been a journaler. Since 17, I've kept journals, and I still do. And so this piece was basically talking about her doing things in everyday life, some of it real, some of it embellished, but it's all in the alter ego's personality. And it's about her just reflecting and looking out the window and just telling the viewer certain things. So I want the viewer to be able to read the pieces and kind of feel like they're looking in on somebody's life, like reading something that they're really not supposed to be reading, but yet they are.
That's so interesting. And I wonder, in exploring a very familiar space, the space of your studio, the space of the city blocks outside, through the viewpoint of an alter ego, how did that change, or did it change your relationship to the space around you?
I don't think it changed the space around me as much as it changed me. I think that the alter egos, because I've always been observant and looking around at what's going on, which is why, as an artist, a lot of my work is very personal, but then at the same time, I'll go through these phases, like the last 4 years, where the work is very political. overtly political. My work is always political, but sometimes it's really subversive and subtle. And then at times where I feel like I need to come out and be totally in your face in a certain kind of way, where I don't want you to mistake my message. You know, the work is more overtly political, and that's as it was the last 4 years. But I think the alter egos developed when I was like younger, as you know, I'm a very introverted person and very shy. And I feel that in thinking about my growing up, my experience, and my living within this culture that sort of devalues women and assigns roles to women, you know, things are imposed on us. And I think that subconsciously, in creating an alter ego, I was constructing a self that I wanted, you know, to be, you know, and shedding what the assigned roles were. I got to make up who I wanted to be by projecting this woman. And the strange thing is, it worked. It's like I grew into who I projected. So as a result, my later works aren't really focused so much on an alter ego. They're going in another direction because the process of self-actualization was completed through the alter ego.
Interesting.
Oh, wow.
That's really interesting. I raised my hand there, Renee, when you were saying you're an introvert. And so I feel that as we're all sitting here on a live show. I totally feel that in the sense, this need to sort of shed some of that of who you are or project it onto another character, I think is a really interesting way of approaching. It feels almost theatrical in a way, your work.
It is. It was definitely, my mother said I should have been an actress.
I can totally see that. Absolutely. Well, I'm really curious too. Language is so extremely important to sort of, clearly this is a major part of your work. I love seeing this. I wish we could have everyone see it in person, because there's all this wonderful marginalia and the sense that we're sort of pulling a curtain back and really getting a sense of sort of an interiority. Yeah. I also would love to chat a little bit about your more contemporary works, because you talked a lot in our preliminary conversation about how you sort of toggle between figuration or sort of realism and abstraction, and how in those moments of abstraction, language in terms of titles are really important to you. And I'd love to sort of delve into your abstract works and talk a little bit about how language plays an important role, and also what kinds of spaces or places are you creating in these abstracted worlds?
You know, it's interesting that you asked, you know, what kind of spaces am I creating? Because I'm going through a transition right now. Like you said, a lot of my earlier work up until the recent past was based in installation and creating spaces, creating a setting with the alter ego. But what happened was, because I'm so perceptive, way before the 2016 election, or as early as 2014, I started feeling a certain way. And I always trust my gut. I learned to do that. And because I'm such an empath and a sensitive, you know, perceptive person, I'm like, something is brewing, something is going on, something's not right. I don't feel right. I trust that. And so I started creating these works, and a lot of it was about healing. A lot of it was about removing myself from this reality, this space, and projecting myself into, like, let's say, like Sun Ra says, space is the place. I was shooting outward to another world that I felt was more desirable than this space that I felt coming, you know, what this space was going to become. And so that piece that you just showed is called How We Heal. And I find myself in the abstracted work, the abstractions, trying to create a sort of atmospheric space where, you know, maybe I'm trying to make the idea of spirit tangible, or the idea of, you know, when I'm doing the conjuring, what does the act of conjuring, what does the magic look like? What does conjuring look like when it's transpiring? What does the energy look like? And so that's what pieces like this are about. Like, you know, those things could even be like cells in your body moving around and healing or whatever. And then I'll make these little notations, like maybe about some herbs or something like that, that, you know, you're possibly using for healing. But it's always about, I think that most of my abstract work, I can say, is about creating space on a two-dimensional surface in the paintings.
And what we're seeing here, it looks like mixed media. I'm just wondering if you talk a little bit about sort of the materials you were using on this work of art. Is this handmade paper?
It is.
Yeah.
You know, it's like when Carol and I made the book that you're going to reference in a little while, we had a lot of handmade paper left over. And all the way from that time, I had saved it in my flat files. Then one day I was fooling around in there and came across this handmade paper. And, you know, I used to paint on canvas because I was trained as a painter. And then when I started doing sculpture and totally left painting alone for years and years and years, when I finally got back to painting, I found that I couldn't paint on canvas anymore. I didn't like the texture. So now all of my paintings are on wood panels, smooth wood panels. But for some strange reason, when I came across this handmade paper, I felt the need to paint on it. And I liked the texture of the paper, but I didn't like the texture of the canvas. And somebody pointed out to me, maybe it's the fact that the canvas is too regular a pattern and this is not. And so you like the randomness of the paper. That might be, I don't know, but I like the texture. But this is acrylic and I think colored pencil on handmade paper.
Really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious if we can take a look at another image that you call Come Back, Gil. And I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit more about what that title references and also a little bit more about the process of that work.
Okay, this is one of my most recent paintings. Like I did that a few weeks ago. And it's a small painting, one of my abstractions. Once again, trying to picture how energy looks as it's moving about in space. And Gil refers to the poet, writer Gil Scott Heron, who was a performer. And Gil Scott Heron was very prominent during the 60s, during the civil rights movement. You know, his music was really, really important back then. And Gil was another person who had the ability to think critically and you know, observe what was going on in society and see that we're headed for, you know, he knew that we would be here right now. I'm sure if he's not alive anymore. He died. I'm not sure, maybe in the 90s, but I'm sure he would have seen where we were headed just like I did. And, you know, when I said, I titled this Come Back, Gil, because at times like this, we need those kinds of poets and sages to, you know, to give voice to all that's happening in society. And it's a voice that I miss right now. I would love to hear what you have to say in his music and in his performances about all the things that we've been going through. So this is me talking to spirit, you know, saying, come back, Gil.
And Renee, it looks almost like there's a shadow underneath. Is there like a certain amount of volume to the work?
This is a thicker panel. This panel may be like about 1.5 inches deep. Some of the panels are more flat than others, but this is this might be like 8 by 10. And so it's on the wall. So that's the shadow of the panel on the wall.
Got it. It just looked a little bit circular, and it was also in like mimicking the circular form in the center of the composition. So I didn't know if there was like a roundedness to it.
Right. Yeah. No. This is a two-dimensional surface. Yeah. And this is acrylic on panel.
I'm just I'm blown away by the way you've used color to suggest warmth and light. It feels like in a lot of the works you shared with us, that your more contemporary works, especially, there's a sense that they're glowing from inside. So it makes me think again of this sense of soul or interiority, and I just find that really incredible. I want to just touch on one other work, and you did mention it. It was a collaboration that you did with DC, a DC poet, Carol A. Bean, and it was actually selected as a NMWA Library Fellows Artist Book. So you collaborated, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about the work you did with Carol on that particular piece. And we do have some images of it's a sort of handmade paper, and it's folded into an accordion style book. And then you've created sort of the inserts, which are illustrations that are in response to Carol's poem. Can you tell us a little bit more about that project?
Yes, Carol was the wife of artist Michael Platt, who passed away, a couple of years ago. And she's a poet and a writer. And sorry if you can hear somebody hammering, but like I said,
we're live.
You're live.
But she came to me and she told me about, I think it was a competition that the museum was having. And she wanted us to submit something to see if we can collaborate on doing a book. And I was like, sure, because like I said, I have a relationship with poets and love the idea that she wanted me to interpret her words. And so she gave me the poems. And then I decided that, I was trying to think of the best way to convey what she was saying, because normally, at this time I wasn't doing the figurative work or the work like this, but it gave me a chance to bring my painting skills back out. And all of those were actually paintings on paper that were then translated for the piece. So yeah, these were little paintings, but in doing them, I kept in mind her words. So it just wasn't just about me. It was about the collaboration and letting her words guide me to create the images.
I love how intimate this is. It really feels like, I don't know, like something that almost like a map that you would pull out to sort of guide you in where you're going. Like it has that sort of folding structure, that kind of sense of almost like the tucked in artworks feel almost like they could be destinations in a way. So I think there's something kind of really, really lovely about the what I imagine to be the physical experience of interacting with this work.
Yeah, I like the idea that you could pull out each poem and the illustration that's right with it, hold it in your hand, pass it to somebody. I also like the idea that if you wanted to, you could take them all out and have them framed and create a line along a wall of this, long running series of poems with the illustrations. So that's the way we thought about it when we conceived of the book.
Yeah, but that's really nice that you're giving folks that flexibility of how they want to engage with the work, but also how they want to engage with it in their own space.
Right.
Which is really nice so that people can make their own installation.
Right, exactly.
I will say that these works, because it was selected as the Fellows Prize, it was actually published on small sort of editions. So people could purchase them inexpensively from the museum and sort of have them in their home. So the idea of being able to bring Carol's words and your imagery home with them, to your point, Veronica, is this very sort of intimate experience. And the poem, Renee, the poem is about people sort of suffering from home insecurity or homelessness in Washington, DC. Is that correct?
It's about everything. It's about displacement, once again, about place and feeling the place, like you talk about pride of place. It's like living here in DC, which has become very expensive, and it's been a place that I feel has inspired my work. I mean, I've lived here, over 30 years. So I lived here more than I lived in Pittsburgh. So this has been so much a part of, developing or influencing who I've become as a person. And so Carol was looking around at the time we did this. Gentrification was starting, wasn't at the level that it is now. And so there were some places that were still distressed, really distressed, like O Street, where I grew up. So being able to illustrate her poems, I was looking at the same thing she was looking at. And, the idea of people, being homeless and moving about the city. And then the violence, she makes reference to some of the violence that was taking place as well. And so, and like for this particular image that I'm looking at, you see the bullet holes that she makes reference to in the poem.
Yeah. I want to say, I want to we're going to transition to Shan, but I just want to say thank you so much, Renee, for sharing some of your older works as well as some of your newer pieces. And we're going to bring you back on for the Q&A with Shan towards the end. So we'll sort of, you'll disappear into space, but you'll be back with us in about 20 minutes. And thank you so much for being with us today on the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been such a pleasure, and we'll talk soon. So kind of with this consideration of place, and it was so good to hear Renee kind of talking about her process of collaboration, as well as her engagement with place. I want to take us now to Baltimore. Since, BMA NMWA is a show about neighboring cities, neighboring institutions, and have a Baltimore-based artist, Shan Wallace, join us. And so Shan is someone who has a deep engagement with the city of Baltimore and its people. She's known for her photography, particularly her portraits of folks that she meets around the city. And she has more recently been exploring collage, which is a new love that we're going to be exploring in more depth today, with an outdoor project called The Avenue. And so I want to say hello and welcome, Shan. It's so great to have you on with us.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited. And thank you, Renee, for sharing. I really enjoyed hearing about your process.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so I think maybe we can start a little bit by just kind of letting people know where we are in space, because you can tell that this is a very large work. There's the BMA in the background. But kind of when you were brought in to do this project along some construction fencing, like, how did you settle on the avenue as a subject, and then sort of think about all the layers that you added into that?
Well, I think this is the largest that I've ever shown. And so when it was offered to me, I wanted to think more about where I was. And it's, you know, the BMA is in a very particular part of town because it's near Rolling Park. It's near John Hopkins. It's in a very particular area. And so as you can see, maybe in the back, like a small piece of a yellowish building is the Spring House. And so I knew with the Spring House being not too far from the BMA, but also now for the last many decades being at the BMA, I knew I wanted to collaborate with the Spring House. And since the Spring House was, of course, much further north and the BMA is much more further east, I think it is like middle ground between the two parts of the city. And so that's what I was really thinking about, really the Spring House, and trying to find a relationship between my work and the Spring House, but also build this relationship really in just this area here by the BMA.
That's really, I think, interesting to think about it, about the avenue as like a, not just only a geographic intersection, but also a historical and cultural and social intersection. And for those who haven't been to the BMA, the Spring House is technically a part of our collection. It's a building that was used further north in Roland Park as a place to store dairy and food and keep things cool. And it was a site where enslaved people were working and, you know, doing the work of caring for people and for, you know, food, and just sort of engaging with the space as a place where sustenance was being cultivated at the same time that, you know, it was a space of tremendous dispossession as well. So maybe I want to kind of dive in a little bit closer to these 5 digital collages that you created. And so we'll bring up the first one, which is Blackness, and wait for Andrea to bring things up. Great.
So yeah, Blackness, its name, it's Black, BLACK, and Nuss, NUSS. It's actually named after a song by a jazz musician. I am blanking on the name, but he is this jazz musician who's blind, but his performance, his music is very extravagant. like he would see him often on stage with 3 saxophones and his dog in like a suit. I don't know why I'm blanking on his name.
I did a little Google search, and I'm going to tell you a name and see if it's right. Okay, so
yes,
got Rashawn Roland Kirk.
Yes,
perfect. Google delivered.
But he has this album that I really love, and this song Blackness is just all of these instruments. His music is just full of instruments, full of soul, and so I was thinking about that in this piece, because most of when I started this, I was like blanking on like, well, I don't really know that much about food and the journey of food. And so I did a bunch of research, tons and tons of research, lectures, books, dissertations, everything. And I came across this woman's work, Dr. Jessica B. Harris. She actually has a Netflix series called High on the Hog. But I read High on the Hog. I listened to all of her talks and all of the articles about it. And it has influenced my work. It's still continuing to influence my work because it gave me such an intricate and detailed journey and perspective of the journey of the culinary journey from Africa to America. And a lot of that was, she talks so much about enslaved on plantations, the men were the cooks and the women were more of the domestic work. And you can kind of see the evolution of that because the chefs of Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, like the chefs of presidents, were men. And then that the women had different, duties. And then you have this main figure that's in many of the pieces, Pigfoot Murray. She's in the middle of this collage carrying like a bunch of pig feet. She migrated from Mississippi Delta to Harlem. And so here I bring her to Baltimore as a stop before she gets to Harlem. So it was kind of like reimagining how we engage with food and what takes place around food. And I use my own photographs to make the collages, which the collaboration and the conversation with community and with my sitters and subjectivity is embedded in the collage. I don't have my collages without my photographs, and I don't have my photographs without consent and without, that mutual collaboration and mutual authorship of just this archive. And so Melba's Place is a club in Baltimore. It's like an old club. You have to be like 25 in order to get in, but I've been seeing it since I was like 10 and couldn't wait to go to Melbourne. So I just used a sign just to, really push these small details of Baltimore to the forefront while embedding these small pieces of history of the culinary journey that I learned about. And so a lot of the, my collages are really about the detail. And there's something for everyone. Like on the bottles, it's rum. I'm thinking about how in Jamaica, people were paid with rum, and during slavery, enslaved people were not paid with money, but they were paid with food and also rum. And so I have these different types of rum, like North Carolina rum, New Orleans rum. And I just really wanted to paint a picture of a time where Black people, enslaved people had more agency over their lives. I knew that I didn't want to show, a true reflection of slavery. I didn't want to show Black people enslaved. I more so wanted to show what are some of the roles that we played in the culinary journey. How can they show up in the work that is in conversation with the Spring House? Because the Spring House is about food.
And so,
can I ask Shan? Oh, sorry, Veronica. You talk about how you use your own imagery in your collages, and I'm thinking a lot about this idea of ingredients, right? And how the ingredients of what you're cooking here are all yours. And I'd love to hear more about why that's important to you.
It's important. One, because I just like to use my own photographs. I'm a photographer, so I don't have to use other people's photographs. I think, in collage especially, we see photographs, but not every artist is the owner of that photograph. And for me, I just it's a control thing. I want to be in control of what I can collage and intersect and layer together. And then it really is a dedication to my sitters and to my city and to my community. And so it feels only right with collage, I get to be a lot more creative, and I also get to be a lot more personal. And I like to, embed these people into the collage because they are a part of my personal journey as a photographer, but also as a human being. And so it's really, really important to use my own photographs. And I have so many photographs. And if I don't have the thing, I'll draw it, or I'll just go out and take photos of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you talked too about the importance of kind of creating an archive as you go, and really sort of thinking about, this collage making is kind of drawing from your history in the making, in a way, but then also pulling on threads of kind of, capital H history as well as personal history. Like here we have details like, a tombstone that belongs to it's part of your family's sort of history. Yeah, your grandparents. At the same time that, you're seeing different landmarks from around Baltimore. And so I think it is really interesting to think about how you're both imagining a space sort of through this collaging of different people kind of to form different figures, but you're also drawing very directly from the city at a specific point in time. In its imagery, even if you're referencing a lot of other points in time, kind of in terms of this like imaginative historical space.
Yeah, it was, all of my grandparents raised me, and they were born in the 20s and I was born in 91. So there's a huge age gap. And I think that I've taken on so much of them. So I feel often to a lot of people really old, and I'm super old fashioned. And so it's only right for me to embed them into the work that I'm doing, because a lot, they've transitioned, but I still have them apart so much. And so I only want to honor them with the work that I can create, because it was tough raising me during a particular time. And since they had raised their own kids. And so it's like here, this house actually is from Nina Simone. It's Nina Simone's childhood home that I visited in Tryon. And I just wanted to put in all of my collages, but especially this one, I kind of wanted to add some significance of the ancestors into the collages and kind of bring it all together, like times of worship, but also you can see in the back, the women are walking into the home. I'm imagining that's like the repast. And with just funeral, just the cemetery funeral vibe, I'm thinking about some of the early stages of mutual aid. Like a lot of mutual aid societies were funeral homes. And just caring for not only the living people, but caring for the dead as well. And so this was really about that. And here on the right-hand side, you again see Pickford Murray with another figure, with a baby figure, just, honoring their own ancestors and honoring people who may be buried. So this one was a really personal one. And I can, with confidence, say that grieving has been becoming a more collaborative relationship. I always grieve my own personal life, but also things that I see in the world. And I want to allow grieving and grief to not take power of me, but instead use it as a way that there's some agency, and remember that grief can really be a driving factor to the things and the art that I make out in the world.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting to think about grief as something that is kind of about finding balance in a way.
Yes.
And recognizing that like it's always there.
It's always there.
But there's always possibility. There's always joy. There's always hope. There's always, the fact that, people are alive. So I think it's really interesting to think about that kind of complementary relationship in your work of seeing, the ancestors, seeing the history, seeing the past as always with the present.
Yes. And here I'm trying to, embrace that balance. And this is literally the work that I'm trying to do to make sure that when there is grief, there is balance. When there's grief, there is agency over Shan. When there's grief, grief is a part of the process. And I'm all about being transparent about the process. And so I feel like here, there are a lot of different subtleties and small details, but grief is like the biggest factor in this particular piece.
And we see, though, this balance is so interesting, this visual like sense of sort of the yellow flowers and the sunlight sort of, or the sun sort of coming through the clouds as a way of sort of creating a visual balance, but also that sense of balance and meaning in terms of finding hope in grief as well.
And another thing, like we talked about archive and Blackness, and here, both of these signs are gone from those buildings. And so it is a way to kind of, I guess, like activate archives and like the creative process, because these signs are gone. They won't be replaced. The city's changing. So much of what I photographed and put into my collages from the people have transitioned. Buildings have been closed down. People have lost buildings. Gentrification, the city's changing so much. And so there is like these small details of archives in the collages as well.
I think it's also interesting to consider how you're kind of creating a journey across the 5 collages. And so like you've sort of set up Pigfoot Mary as a person whom we follow kind of from one space to the next. So this is actually a little bit of a skip in terms of like the order. But this is Supper's Our Time. And kind of looking at this one, which is kind of at the end of the cycle, one of the things that you shared is that this is a place where you've brought in more references of growing up with your grandparents. And I wonder if you can share a little bit about how those personal details are showing up.
So here I'm imagining, so this door is actually the door that, it's the spring house door. So when it's open, this is the actual door. And so a range of these details come from Baltimore, Cuba, and South Africa. Like the background is South Africa. The figure that's sitting down is Cuba. And so I was really trying to make my grandparents in a way. And what in my imagination of like, if I grew up if I grew up with my grandparents, if they were younger, what would it really look like? And so the small details that are really about my grandparents, the TV in the back and the 2 people dancing in black and white. I've probably seen every John Wayne movie possible to see. We spent a lot of time watching black and white movies. My grandmother, it's interesting because they were very traditional Black people. And they, husband and wife, and that was the roles that they played. And my grandmother spent so much time cooking, those old Southern dishes and using those old Southern ingredients and recipes to make dinner for my grandfather, dinner 3 times, food 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and did it like clockwork. But I also realized that I didn't eat the same food. Like she would make them hog maws and like chitlins and like make all of the meals that she learned and that he learned down south, but I wouldn't eat those same things. And so I just remember our house and our kitchen having these different smells. And my grandmother literally cooking, seasoning something and then got the other hand like on the stove, like whipping something while just moving so quickly like clockwork to make the food that she was making. And the little girl is kind of me. My grandmother used to send me to the store all the time to go and get a carton of eggs or go and get some pig feet for your grandfather. And I'm super young, so it freaked me out. But here I was really just thinking about our lives together and also my imagination of our lives if they were younger and if this was a different time, if this was a different era, if they didn't migrate to Baltimore, to Maryland, but if we were in South Carolina, this is kind of how it would look.
We talked a little bit too, like when we had our initial chat about how these collages are very, very personal in so many ways. You've embedded your personal history with growing up with your grandparents. And yet we talked about how there's always some item, something that sort of feels like anyone can universally sort of say, oh, I know what that food product is, or I know what that bottle reminds me of something. And I really appreciate how there's an entry point for almost everyone when they look at these collages that they do.
That's certainly on purpose, because my collages, especially the Avenue, not usually, but especially the Avenue, is so research based. It's really what I imagine, what I know, and what I'm learning. And I'm learning so much. And so I know there will be, parts of details in the collages where people can identify, or pieces in the collages where people can just relate. And so I'm really looking to have something for everyone in the collages. If you read High on the Hog, or you've done all of this research about food, or if you're just simply here to just bear witness and show and see the work, like Make Market. This one, like, there are small details of the figures' mouths open. And so I'm thinking about Charleston, where Black people would go and barter. And it was a way that they could get their goods. There was a way that they could make money. And so, we have the Arabers here in Baltimore who also have their mouths open. They're yelling out the goods and the services that they offer. So I'm really like taking this, inviting people who know a certain particular history to see it again. And then I'm also inviting people to kind of see the contemporary, because many of us buy fruit from the guys, the Arabers, and those practices, those traditions are still very much so alive and the same.
Yeah, and I'm just going to point it out for folks who haven't seen kind of the BMA campus before. This big yellow building in the background is the Spring House, and so I think it's interesting to sort of see it here in your collage. But at the BMA currently, like, you can't really see it that well from the street, just because we've got a whole big construction project, which is not the subject of this show. But if you walk around, like, you have to kind of enter into a different spatial relationship with it that is a lot kind of closer, a lot more intimate. So I think it's really interesting to have folks be able to see this conception of it as a space that has been kind of reimagined, and where, its relationship to people and to food is so much clearer before going around and kind of being in that personal proximity to the Spring House, and thinking about it as something that, it's a space where people lived and worked, and it wasn't just like an architectural form.
Right. Yeah. I especially love the detail in the middle with the guy, like, inside, like, the window of the Spring House. And the opacity is changed a little, because I didn't want him to, I kind of wanted him to be a blur. I didn't want him to stand out too much. But all the different signs are details from photographs that I've taken at Lexington Market. And collaging has truly transformed how I take photographs, because now I'm thinking more about details. Now I'm looking through my viewfinder, and I'm not only just looking at the subject focal point, but I am looking at everything that is in the background. And if there is an interest in the background, I'm changing my aperture so I can see the background and letting the light hit differently. And so Making Market is actually probably one of my favorites because of the signs. And I never paid attention to those signs until I was making this work.
Yeah, and we brought up Hemming's Tavern now, kind of speaking of signs, just to sort of bring you into an interior space too. And Shan, this was also shot a lot at Lexington Market, or at least it kind of, I see things that remind me of it, but
The signs are definitely Lexington Market. The figure in the back that's holding the food, she's from Lexington Market. Her in Supper's Our Time, the hand that's pouring the ketchup is really from this woman here. I photographed her pouring ketchup on a chicken for someone. But all of the signs from Lexington Market. And here, I love this one because it's, James Hemings was, a chef and never got his freedom, and was trained and had such a complicated relationship with Thomas Jefferson, and ended up running away, leaving his family, leaving his kids, like running away and coming to Baltimore. And coming to Baltimore, working at a tavern. As he's in Baltimore, the president is like getting people to communicate to him, like, can you come back? You won't get your freedom, no, but I want you to come back because you're a hell of a chef. Yeah. And Hemings just wasn't feeling that the president wasn't coming to him personally. And so, apparently, he ended his life here in Baltimore. So here I wanted to just imagine, like, if he didn't end his life, what would happen? He would own a tavern. There were women cooking, women chefs, because historically there haven't been too many women chefs outside of the household. And so this is kind of imagination of Hemings and his life in Baltimore if he didn't commit suicide.
I think we're going to probably sort of transition to Q&A, but I want to say thank you for what I find really interesting. I find a lot about your process and your work really interesting, but I feel like there's this really interesting sort of flattening of space, certainly, and of time as well. You're sort of bringing historical figures into contemporary awareness, which I appreciate, and also this sort of
with contemporary faces too.
Yes, and this sort of this composite of these figures as well. You talk about how the hand is of one individual and the face is of another, and so you're really creating this alternative sort of environment and space for us to consider. Thank you so much for sharing more of your work.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's also like deeply Baltimore, because
Baltimore.
This is right. This is the city. This is the people. And even if you're creating a different space, it's still made of Baltimore, which I think is kind of an interesting take on like a different sort of almost like a site-specific photography, or even if
I love the city. The city has raised me, and it feels only fair to just put us in all of the things that I do.
Yeah. Well, and I'd love to bring Renee Stout back on, and here she is. Perfect. So kind of, Shan, you mentioned that you love Baltimore, the city raised you. Renee, you've spent, like 30-ish years in DC. I wonder if you can both sort of think about kind of your relationship to your respective cities now, especially since we've spent like this past year and change kind of in a place where moving around in public and freely and like seeing people has been so restricted. Like how does your relationship to the place where you are sort of feel these days?
Well, during this time, I really had to reestablish my relationship with Baltimore. One, because I was nomadic for 6 years, so I hadn't really technically lived here. I just would come and visit. I would work, take photographs, do a bunch of things, and I would go. And so I really moved back here in October, and I really had to take a different look. I had to really negotiate what my time was going to be here with the city. And it forced me also to kind of reinvent my process, because we have to keep a safe distance. People have on masks, and just safety precautions. And so being here has been like, everything's coming anew, because I'm reinventing my process and looking at things and trying to rediscover the city. So it's been really nice to be back here and make work differently, and have a different type of process, because I feel like before I was kind of fixed. And I think now I'm so much more confident in not shutting out any parts of the city and being a lot more open beyond what I know, but just really welcoming new discoveries.
Well, for me, being the introvert, it's like I wouldn't have wished anything that happened in 2020 to happen at all. But because I'm an introvert and spend most of my time at home anyway, people who are more social probably had a real problem learning to deal with not being able to go out and hang with people and move about, whereas I spend most of my time here anyway by myself. Fortunately, I had a cat that passed away like 2 weeks ago.
Oh, sorry.
And so for the whole year, it was just me and her. I didn't have to travel. I didn't have to go do museum talks, out of state. And so I had the last year of her life with her. But, it kept me in my studio and just thinking. One of the things, though, that I did, have a problem with is before COVID, I went roller skating 3 times a week in a rink with other people and got to listen to music, all kinds of soul music, rap, and everything else. That was my social time. And that's where I did see people. And that's where I kept in shape and everything like that. And then when COVID came, I had to go to an outdoor rink over in Anacostia Park, which was nice because, I didn't realize that they had such a nice rink. And so for months I got a chance while it was still warm to keep roller skating outdoors. But then once it got cold, I couldn't, so it's kind of strange. I mean, being back in the house again, starting to venture out a little bit more now that I've been vaccinated. But like I said, it probably didn't affect me as much as it affected other people. And when I would drive back from the skating rink, because I had to come through downtown, it was amazing to see the city that quiet and to get home in 5 seconds in what would have taken me, 30 minutes to get, or 40 minutes to get through all the traffic. Right. And in a strange way, viewing Washington, DC that way, it was just amazing. It's like, I liked it on some level. And I'm hoping that having come through COVID, we all reassess how we work, live, whatever. Does it have to be the rat race that it was? If people want to work at home, let people work at home, and so that's what I'm hoping that we all learn from, having come through this period, that we don't have to do things the way they've been done.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think it's interesting to kind of think how that sort of reassessment of the way that we work, the way that we live is like, it had to happen. And I think it's going to continue to happen. But I'm also wondering like what that's going to mean for the experience of viewing art. Because sometimes people are viewing art as a means of escape. Sometimes they're viewing art as a means to document and to see themselves reflected. And what I think is interesting about both of your work is that you both kind of satisfy those in some forms. Like people might see them as really distinct impulses. But there is kind of this combination of escape and fantasy and imagination at the same time that, you both put people in your work very, very explicitly. And so I'm wondering, like, how do you see that relationship between kind of the representation and the imaginary?
You want to go, Shan, and then I'll go?
You can go.
Okay. Well, I think coming through this whole period of 2020, I think it had an effect where everybody did some level of introspection, especially being forced to have to sit with themselves. Some people can't even sit with themselves, but then they had to. And I feel for myself, it gave my work more of it already had a sense of immediacy, but then now it really does, in that I think that I decided to say whatever I feel. I don't think I have any filters now after. I have yet to create the kind of work that, I think that I'm coming up on. And I feel like this period has encouraged me to do exactly that. But so I just think that, and like you were saying about the relationship with art and people and what that's going to mean, I have just been one of four jurors for the Phillips collection, is doing a show called Inside, Outside, Upside Down. And the whole show is based on putting out a call to artists to submit works that dealt with the period from March 2020 to February 2021, and how people coped with dealing with the civil unrest and COVID, for that period. I saw some of the most amazing expressions of human expressions about having to deal with the period that we just came out of. And, it makes me wonder whether that's going to make people have a different relationship to viewing art and making art. And so it will just be interesting to see what happens. I have no idea.
Yeah.
I definitely had to reassess I mean, because I felt like the world was coming to an end. I didn't know what was happening. And I realized that there were, with my collage especially, there was so much more I wanted to make. And I also realized that even though it's COVID and I want to make, I had to rely on services of other people. So I knew that my practice had to be a lot more self-sustaining. And I needed to be able to provide myself with the tools and services that I needed to be able to provide. So I spent a lot of time trying to do that and trying to really just reassess what my needs are, what my priorities are. And I'm also super I'm not that social. So I didn't really have a hard time sitting alone. I grew up sitting alone, my grandparents. So that wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was just trying to figure out how do I, first of all, what is it going to look like to kind of rejoin the world? And also, people can't go, the people who are in my work, the audience, when they can't go to museums and institutional spaces to see my work, then what? And so it really has driven me to think more about public art, which is why the Avenue was great, because it's outside. You don't need to be around anybody. You can take a 5-minute walk up Art Drive and then that be it. And so I've been thinking a lot more just about public art, because I don't want the work that I do to have any boundaries, and I want it to be more accessible. And I think accessibility was also a piece that I was thinking about, because, I try to make my work as accessible. I give people copies, I wheat paste, the Avenue, but even still, I want it to be even more accessible and accommodating. And so that was some things that I was also thinking about. How can I accommodate the people? Because I have relationships with my city, I have relationships with my sitters. How can I just accommodate them?
Yeah. And I have to say that your presence here today and your generosity of time is making your work more accessible too. I will say that a silver lining of this last year for Veronica and I has been this opportunity to speak with artists in this format and to really bring your art to folks wherever they feel most comfortable and safe. So I want to thank you both so much for your time. I'm mindful of time. I have one question I want to ask both of you. If there's one thing in your city that people should experience or see, what would it be? Easy question, right?
Oh, I love the faces that we're getting from both of you.
I want to go roller skating. I've heard about this roller rink at Anacostia. It sounds amazing.
Yeah, I'd have to say, just because I love skating, that is just a gem of a skating rink, because it's in the park. It's on the river. You're looking over and you can see, the river, and the idea that it's kind of in disrepair right now, but I think they're starting to see that people are enjoying it. So I think that in the future, they may kind of come and spruce it up. But I love that there was a downpour one day and you don't even have to stop skating. And it's just like, it's just, to me, a little gem, tucked away in the park down there. So look, I'm partial to skating. So of course,
I love it.
I think I would say a 2-hour walk throughout the city. You can break it up. You can do 20 minutes one day and 20 minutes another day, but a 2-hour walk through the city, I think, will give people a nice and complicated but real perspective of the city.
Yeah. I love these suggestions. Thank you both so much for your time today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Nice to meet you, Renee.
Nice to meet you, Shan. Nice to see your work and hear you explain it as well.
Likewise.
Yes, thank you so much. And it's bittersweet to announce that this is our last episode of BMA NMWA, and that this has really been a project that was born out of not being able to be in person. But I'm so grateful that you've been here to join us for our finale, and to really think about our relationship to each other and to place and to kind of the imagination and possibility that art has opened up for us throughout our lives, and that I think we'll continue to see. So.
And I want to just thank you, Veronica, for working with me on this, and thanks to the BMA for the technical support. And I do want to mention that NMWA will be sort of doing a similar kind of live program, so keep your eyes and ears out. We'll probably start in the fall. We've announced a major closure and renovation of the museum for about 2 years, so we will be continuing our virtual programming, and we appreciate everyone who's watching and allowing us into their personal space today. Everyone, I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks so much for joining.
Shout out to Shake and Bake, Shan. Shake and Bake.
Shout out to Shake and Bake. Absolutely.
Perfect. Can't end on a better note. Thank you so much,
Thank
everybody.
you all so much. Have a great day, everybody.